Parenting's hard, you don't know what to do. You're blaming your kids, but it's probably you. You love your kids and that you can trust. Just remember your kids don't suck.
Welcome to Your Kids Don't Suck, cultivating closeness with your children through non-coercive conscious parenting. We're your hosts, Cara Tedstone and Rythea Lee. Let's dive in and grow together. I should read your bio. I should introduce you to our listeners.
Sure.
We're here with Iris Chen. I'm so excited because I've been following you a long time, Iris, on my personal account. And Iris, you're an author, a recovering tiger parent, certified parenting coach, and founder of the Untigering movement. And you've written here, when her authoritarian attempts to raise obedient and high-achieving children only led to years of tears, tantrums, and conflict, she knew something had to change, and it wasn't her children. Ugh, I get chills when I read that. Through her writing and speaking, she now shares her journey and reflections on how to shift from parenting that is rooted in power to parenting that's grounded in partnership. Her mission is to inspire generational and cultural transformation, especially among Asian communities. And you can read more about Iris's adventures in her book, which is called Untigering, Peaceful Parenting for the Deconstructing Tiger Parent, and on her blog at untigering.com. So that's amazing to read. I mean, I have so many questions. Should we start with maybe defining what untigering is?
Sure. So, like I mentioned in my bio, it's like a deconstructing tiger parent. I don't know if people know what tiger parenting is. That term got popularized by Amy Chua in her book from, I think it was 2011, where she wrote The Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. Um, it just sparked this conversation in the parenting world about what is good parenting. And for her, she was really talking about what she called quote unquote Chinese parenting, which is highly authoritarian, very demanding, um, at times harsh and very extreme, expecting high achievement from your children. And I think for many immigrant children, second generation or beyond, Asian families and other immigrants, that is definitely an experience that we had. Like that was just normal parenting from our cultures where, yes, of course, you have to get straight A's, or yes, like I was not allowed to date until college. I couldn't go out on weekdays, like there was just highly controlled environments and expectation of behavior. So when I think about untigering, um, when I had my own children, I was like, I'm going to loosen it up a bit. I'm not going to be so extreme as my parents, but I still expect obedience. I still expect you to do the best you can in everything that you try and do. Um, so untigering for me is really detoxing and healing from that type of authoritarian parenting that we grew up with. So that inner child healing for ourselves. And then if we have children, how to detox from that type of parenting if we've been practicing that type of parenting with our children, really learning what it means to not have a power over relationship, which is like unheard of because almost all our relationships have this unequal power dynamic in it. That's almost all we know, and especially with children, we don't know how to share power with children. And so yeah, that's really what untigering has meant for me. And I really wanted it to be in this sort of continuous, like the ing of it, where it's not like you're healed. It's not like something that you achieve. It's a continued process where you're moving in the direction of your values and in what you hope that it can be, but there's just so much grace and compassion along the way too. So even in the beginning, as we were talking about adultism and how people haven't woken up to it, I mean, I was like years into this type of tiger parenting, and I was so entrenched in it and didn't question it for many years. Um, And so I have a lot of compassion for parents and for others who are stuck in that mindset because I was there. I was there and like, getting yelled at or being told I'm doing it wrong probably would have turned me off. It wouldn't have brought me on this process either. So, um, really wanting to have a lot of compassion for parents wherever they are in the journey, even as I'm challenging them, hopefully, to rethink things and rethink how they use their power in their relationship with their children.
Hmm. But
Wow.
so you said you were going to loosen it up with your kids, but obviously something else happened.
Yes, it didn't work.
Mm.
So the thing about tiger parenting is you expect it to work. If you have rules, you expect your children to obey them. If you have expectations, you expect your children to meet them. And my oldest son in particular didn't get the memo. He didn't comply to my expectations and my demands. There I think what I didn't realize was that he was a highly sensitive child.
Mm.
And so he would get overwhelmed easily, upset easily. And I just assumed that that was him being difficult, him being naughty, him choosing
Mm.
to have a tantrum when we could be having a nice time. What's wrong with you? And so again, I was just looking at the surface behavior and judging it, labeling him because of it. And so I thought, okay, well, how do I control the behavior?
Mm.
Because I wasn't looking at his needs. I wasn't looking at what the core problem was. It was just the behavior. And so the more his behavior escalated, the more I escalated in terms of control, in terms of punishment, anger, all of that. It just continued to devolve even as it escalated. And there were years of this. It probably um, wasn't until he was around 7 or 8 where I went to a parenting workshop. And even though things were hard with my kid, I felt like I still, I still have things under control. Like I'm still the boss. I'm still doing the things that I know I should be doing that all like these behavior management books were telling me to do. So I still felt like good about it. Um, and then the speaker was just talking about brain science.
Mm.
And I sort of grew up in a very conservative, evangelical type of environment, religious environment. And so the parenting books that I was reading didn't talk about the brain science. It was talking about behavior management, about hierarchy and authority and all of that stuff, about character and about how we have to, shape our children's character and all of that. And so when I first heard about this brain science, where the speaker was just putting up images of a child's brain who was like healthy, and then a child's brain that was like neglected and abused, and how parts of their brains were, overactive and overdeveloped. Their fear, those sort of um, just instinctual parts of their brain that are in fight flight mode because they feel that constant threat, those were sort of larger than normal. And then parts of their brains that help them to regulate and to think logically and all those were less developed. And how when we are punishing and angry and yelling at our kids and coming at them, their bodies feel that threat and they can't help themselves but to lash out and melt down and scream and cry. So there's like a very physiological reason why they are doing what they're doing, and how we as parents really need to help their brains and their bodies to calm down rather than heaping more
Mhm.
threat onto them. Um, so that was the first time that it was like reframed for me in terms of what I was doing to cause this reaction in my child. I had always blamed him,
Mm.
like it was his fault. He was willfully choosing this and not seeing how I was contributing to it. And I think that was the first time like I really saw the harm in my own behavior and felt so much grief and pain about how I just hadn't seen him. I hadn't understood
Mm.
what his needs were at all. Um,
Hmm.
and so that really began the process of me like realizing there are some things I have to absolutely stop doing in this very moment.
Mm.
I don't know what I'm going to do because I don't have any skills right now. But I went home that day and I was like, any physical punishment that I have been doing, this is what I told my partner, I absolutely have to stop because I see
Mm.
what it has done and what it's doing to my relationship with him and to him, to my oldest son in particular. So that's sort of like the one of the many moments that made me like have this awakening as to how I was parenting and how harmful that was to my child.
I'm always so moved by the when a parent has the aha moment and they're willing, because I grew up with parents who were never willing. That never opened up for them. They never had the aha moment. So when I see it, it's just so beautiful to me and so touching. Like, what a profound generational change in that moment. The shift, like, was right. And obviously it's a big, long journey and it never ends. It's not like suddenly you knew what to do, but you were open. You
Mm.
were open.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful that happened. But also, he was like 7 or 8, so it's sort of like past that time when they say your children are like most influenced by their development. And hearing stories about how when mothers or when people first gave birth to their child, like seeing how precious their child was and knowing that they would never lay a hand on their child, like I didn't have that experience either. And so just wanting to really in some ways encourage parents, like it's never too late.
Mhm.
I was fairly far along in my parenting before I woke up and before I realized I needed to make a shift. And so, no matter how old your children are, knowing that it's never too late, that there's opportunity to repair.
Mm.
And like even thinking for us as adults, if our parents came to us and apologized or made a shift even now and
Yeah.
acknowledged some of the harm they caused, like how
Mm.
moving and powerful and healing that would be for us. So it's
So
never too late.
true. I know. I always say that we're always children in relationship to our parents. So truly, like truly, psychologically, it's never too late if your
Mm.
parents are still living, if your children are still living, if you're still here on earth to communicate an apology and make a repair in that attachment sense, it's never too late because we're always children in relationship to our parents. I just think that's the most beautiful thing.
Iris, with me, I was pretty playful parent. I've always been a playful parent, but I was very controlling and hierarchical until my daughter was 5. And then I had to spend 5 years
Hmm.
working through her rage for the first 5 years. Like, I became like a therapist to her. And that's when her tantrums really began. When I stopped suppressing her
Mm.
and I was like, okay, we're taking the top off. You can do whatever you want. That's when all the explosion happened. And I had years and years of tantrums and having to apologize and be there for her and show up and do it all. Did you have to do any of that with your son?
I probably have, revisionist history about it. But I mean, I'm sure it took a process, but what I noticed was he was pretty responsive right from the beginning.
Yeah.
Um, so I feel like maybe with children who are more compliant, this is what I've noticed with maybe my second son, where if you're more compliant and then you are parented with more more consciously, more freedom, more respect, you can feel more freedom to show your shadow side. Maybe that's what, like, I'm not sure how your daughter was in those first 5 years. Um, but like my younger son was very compliant, whatever. And I'm noticing now he's like, well, he's also a teenager, also able to show more of his, like not good boy side.
Right.
Whereas like for a child who may be acting out, when I was able to meet my older son's needs more deeply, then that really calmed a lot of his
Mm.
behaviors. And so like the one story that I think about was like he was playing Xbox or something, and it wouldn't connect properly, and he was getting frustrated, and he like threw the controller across the room. And like in the past I was like, okay, well, you don't get to play this, you need to
Right.
go to your room, you don't get to play this for a week or whatever, you have to apologize, you have to do all these things. And in that moment I was like, I really need to show up for him. And so I just like held him. It was like I think it was just so opposite of what I had ever done that it may have like shocked him into like vulnerability, into like, oh, this feels really different. And so yeah, I just held him. Maybe at first he didn't want to be held because he was so frustrated, and then but I stayed with him. um I didn't really say anything. I think I was just there, and then like slowly he came closer, then he got in my lap, and then sort of like melted into me. And I think that was like one of those moments where it's like, oh, this is what it's supposed to feel like. This is what like regulation and attunement, and how when I really see him and see his needs, that we can work through it together. And before it was like always a conflict. It was like bad behavior, then punishment, and just like, this battle. But when I was able to, to show up and enter into that space with him and like validate, that must have been really frustrating that didn't, I mean, I don't even know if I said anything, but like just not punishing him for it and showing up for him. Um, yeah, just seeing how he responded when his needs were met, I think really helped sort of ground me in that like, this feels right. This feels right in my body. And it sort of reinforces that behavior for me. I guess it's positive reinforcement for me when I'm seeing, oh, like he's responding, he's having his needs met. We feel connected through this. Um, yeah. And that was just one of those powerful moments for me.
Oh my God, I love that story so much. That is the sweetest story. Yeah, I was watching Vivek Patel's videos and reading his articles for 2 years before I decided to fully go into a non-coercive direction. In fact, I thought Vivek was nuts, and but then I couldn't help it. I couldn't stop going to it, even though I was like, oh, this guy, what is he doing? And then anyway, so slowly. And then the day I decided I'm going full in, I'm jumping in, I'm just going to take all the controls off. That's how it went for me. I went from this to this, which completely freaked out my partner. He was like, what is going on? But anyway, the day I said to her, I'm not going to stop controlling your food. Let's go out and get you whatever you want. And went out and got tons of candy. She had never had candy really before. So that day was like one of our happiest days. She was like, Mom, Like I was like, we were like friends all of a sudden. Like she was like showing me all the different candy and all the choices. We were laughing, we were trying stuff. Like we became like on the same team, like right on that day that I decided to do that. And yeah, you can, the shift, I mean, it's very terrifying to undo the hierarchical dynamic. It's really scary. It's very chaotic, but the payoff happens, I think, pretty quickly.
Mm.
Yeah.
I
And then it's
agree. Yeah. Yeah. Like, I think, different personalities, some people need to sort of wade in. I think I'm also the type of person who, like, once I believe in something, once it makes sense to me, like, I'm all in.
Mm.
I'm all in. I like jump in. And I mean, it takes some like negotiating and adjusting, but I think that's how I was with yeah, with conscious parenting. And but that doesn't mean that I was, quote unquote, doing it perfectly from the beginning. I mean, there might have been areas that I was still afraid to let go of, but the more I practiced it, and because it was rooted in the belief that children deserve to be their own people, that they're human beings. And so, like, whenever I was doing something, it always like, if it butted up against that truth, I had to question it. It was just like, does this like, yeah, if it didn't fit, then why was I doing it? Why was I
Mm.
continuing in these behaviors of trying to control them if it didn't honor their humanity and their agency and their autonomy, even if it was for their own good? Because, like, for other relationships that I'm in, even though I love them, like my partner, I don't control them. Control is not a part of love in my worldview. And so um
Mm.
yeah, just whenever something didn't jive, whenever I felt like controlling, it was work that I had to do on myself, not something that I needed to project onto my children.
Mm.
Well, also, once you start collaborating, which is an art, and it takes a lot of time to learn how to collaborate. I mean, it's a whole skill set. Once you start doing it and your child gets a taste of being treated like a human with their own values and their own wants and needs and opinions, like once you start honoring who they are, when you start controlling, they're like, what the fuck are you doing? Like
Mm.
they start doing it for you. That's what happens with my
Mhm.
daughter. She'll be like, Mom, we're non-coercive. What are you doing? And I'll be like,
Mm.
can't I just control you today? Just for this 1 hour? Like, I just need to get somewhere. Like sometimes I just want to do it. And she's like, nah, no, we don't do that. So that's another thing, is it becomes a family philosophy.
Right. And then your kid can give you feedback, like we always say. I mean, if you're aware of this from birth, which was kind of my experience, I knew when my daughter was born, I just knew I wanted to parent like this. And she's she's turned 2 in May, so she's not quite 2.5 yet. So, but when they're little, they cry, and there's all this emphasis these days on the internet about like attachment parenting, responsive parenting in infancy, but then they become toddlers and they start doing the developmentally driven thing where they're like, no, 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 everything. And it's really hard with young children to consider that feedback, I think. People are like, that's not feedback. That's not their voice. That's them just being toddlers, and toddlers are assholes, and you have to discipline them and they need to obey. And you just push past their no, you push past their tantrum because they're just having big feelings. You can still validate those and control your kid, don't you know? And I think like when your kid becomes older, there's no way to do that. Like there's no way to just like push past their no when they're bigger and they have feelings, and you'll just end up in a huge massive conflict most of the time. You can still push past it. You can enforce, punishments, but it gets so much harder and bigger and more unmanageable. But in toddlerhood, it's so hard for people to hear that that's actually feedback. That's actually you not taking their feedback and finding another way to collaborate with your child, which you can do. But like Rythea says, it's definitely a skill, and you have to view it as possible, as your ideal outcome, not something that like you just give up on, and then you just let them have the thing because whatever, you can't deal with it. And so you just become, permissive, I guess is how people think about that. And really what we're talking about is like, we're just having feedback. I'm considering my child's feedback, even in infancy, even in toddlerhood and beyond.
Oh, I love that.
Would you tell us, Iris, like, your kids' ages, what are they now?
They are 14 and 16.
Because everybody says teenagers are the worst.
Yeah.
Right? So will you like tell us about, first of all, you can talk about that, but also like, what are your biggest barriers? What are your blocks, or where are you now? And we use non-coercive, conscious, collaborative parenting. I don't know what words you use, but that mindset, what comes up for you? Where do you struggle?
I mean, yeah, so they are now 14 and 16. We've been doing this for, I guess, about 7 years.
Mm.
Um, Maybe longer. I don't know. Um, I'm just so grateful. I really don't understand, or I haven't experienced that trope that teenagers are assholes. Or like using that to describe any group of children is like, oh, okay, probably adultist, right?
Mhm.
But because I don't have a relationship of control over them. And so that rebellion, that pushback, that talkback is like, it's pretty much non-existent because there's nothing to push back on. I'm not controlling them. I honor their agency. I'm there to support them and love them. And so they know, like Rythea, what you were saying, that we're on the same team. We're on the same team. So I'm so grateful that we have that type of relationship. And at the same time, they're still teenagers. And so, hormones, moods, all of that stuff. Like in the past, if I had maybe like spoken to my parents like that, I would have gotten in trouble. And now I'm realizing like they're just teenagers and it's all part of it, like sometimes I'm in a bad mood, sometimes I get snappy, sometimes like I'm gonna speak to in a certain tone because I'm whatever, and how not to take it personally. um I guess even in my relationship with my oldest, like Rythea, I know that you've shared in the past on the podcast about how close you are with your daughter, and I think that's beautiful. um and I actually don't feel like I had that relationship with my oldest in terms of like he is really exploring pure relationships at this time and really leaning into hanging out with his friends and sharing more with his friends. And I'm always available. I believe he knows that I'm not going to judge him or lecture him or whatever, but also being okay with that process of him individuating, him looking for relationships outside of me where I'm not trying to control our relationship to make it so that he's my best friend. He knows that, like, because that's a two-way street, like I know I'm available for him, but um, not to sort of idolize that parent-child relationship either, and to let him be in his own process and to seek the relationships that are meaningful to him. And again, for me not to take it personally, like, why don't you want to talk to me about this, and like, hound him to share all his, what's in his heart. And it's just like, you know yeah, I have to let go. I have to be available and be present, and to continue to like build that trust. But um, giving him space, So that's sort of where I'm at in my relationship with them right now. Um, I mean, I think there's always times of struggle when, because we're also unschoolers. So I think, um, like seeing what other, I guess it's the comparison thing where, oh, excuse me, where we're seeing what other families and parents are doing to sort of like get their kids ready for their future and to, you know, all the college prep and all that. And we're really not doing very much of that.
Mm.
We are in conversation. We do talk about it, but like in this age when so much of parenting is about like college prep, getting into college, all of that. Sometimes we're like, are we doing enough? Sometimes that's the struggle or the stress that I have in my mind. But I know that sort of when I step back and resist the comparison of what everybody else is doing and really just get a sense of how our family is doing and how each of us are doing, then I feel really good. I feel at peace about it.
Wait, so have they unschooled their whole lives?
No, we started probably around the time when I started Untigering my blog, which is
Right.
since 2017.
Uh-huh.
So we were living in China at that time, and I had discovered unschooling and resonated with it. And yeah, so we've been doing it ever since then.
Wow. Do you know that I'm an unschooling parent?
Yeah, I think I do. Yeah.
No, I don't
But then
talk about
you
it.
mentioned that she wants to go to school. Is that?
She's going to go to a performing arts public school in 1 week. Oh my God. We're all going through, our whole family is completely having so many feelings about this. And I don't know if she'll last a day, a week, a month, 3 months, 6 months. I have no idea. I keep telling her, whatever you do is fine. I'm whatever works for you. But I don't talk about unschooling in my social media because people attack me so much.
Mm-hmm. Well,
They just freak out.
I was going to ask you both, maybe. I actually know personally some families that would benefit from some advice around when it comes to going against the grain. I mean, this is one thing, having these ideals inside of your family system, intellectually and also relationally is one thing, but taking them out of school makes people freak out because not just the systemic pressure, the like sort of capitalistic machine that like requires it in a way, but it's also like the internal comparison thing. I would love to hear from you guys both. What do you do for yourselves? Um how do you manage that internally? Like, what is your personal process when it comes to the social pressure, the expectations, even the challenging questions, like the social dynamics outside of your home to like continue to do what you know is right for your family, maybe in the context of unschooling, but it's also, an ableist thing. There's ableism in there. There's when it comes
Class.
to class, like neurodiversities,
Yes.
all of those things. Like, what do you guys do internally when you brush up against that? I know how hard it is for families. They feel like they're kind of unable to keep pushing against it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for me, it's going back to my why, sort of like what I described about in terms of being grounded in the belief that children are human, that they have agency, like going back to my core beliefs, my core values, and seeing if my actions are consistent with that. So I think that's how I do it. Like, why? It's not because I just hate school and want to protect them and like think that it's government propaganda or whatever like that. I think it's just really recognizing that my core value is I want my children to have the freedom to be themselves. And is school consistent with that? Am I consistent with that in my home? Because there's a lot of people who take their children out of school, but then still perpetuate those systems of oppression within their home, right? Like if you're homeschooling in a way that's very controlling, or if you're just trying to do school at home, those are still ways that you're denying your children's humanity and their autonomy and all of that. So for me, really getting back to what my why is, what my hopes are for my children, I think like seeing parenting and like unschooling and all of that through the lens of social justice and anti-oppression really helps me to see these systems that we are a part of that are unjust and rooted in oppression. And so I think it's just that integrity for me to like really have that through line in all of my life, in the way that I interact with my children and in the systems that they are a part of. And like Rythea, like with your daughter, like if they choose to go to school, I would definitely support them. But I think, as we mentioned before, also question, like help them to see, go in with their eyes wide open to recognize what is unjust, to empower them to speak up against it, to opt out of stuff, to really, yeah, push back against some of those systems.
Yeah, I mean it's a highly, highly, highly coercive system. And my kid is about to be exposed to like coercion 8 hours a day. I mean, I don't know how she's gonna manage. I'm so curious how this is gonna be a total shock to her system. She has to sit in a chair for a zillion hours. She has to do what she's told.
Yeah.
You know, I would say the main reason I unschooled my child was that I think it would have really crushed her. I really think it would have crushed her. She also had a lot of trauma. I got divorced when she was 2.5 and she was still nursing. And the divorce was very painful for everybody. And she had to be with me half the time all of a sudden. And she experienced it as an abandonment for sure.
Yeah.
And she went into started hitting kids pretty quickly. Like she just went into full on fight or flight for years, actually, and raging, all kinds of stuff. And I can't imagine having then put her in school with all the stuff that she was dealing with. And I also decided I didn't get her tested. And I think if I had, she would have been given a lot of different diagnoses by this point. She actually ended up resolving a lot of the behaviors that would have been given a diagnosis. But I'm a therapist and I'm a trauma survivor, so I understood that. So many parents don't understand what trauma looks like, and I knew what it looked like. I definitely got scared and doubted myself all the time. I mean, that's the hard part about stepping out of the mainstream. You just doubt yourself so much because there was so little support. Nobody agreed with me. I had to just know myself. I think that when I'm listening to your story, I'm like, wow, you've probably gone, you know, light years and planets away from your upbringing in one, you know, one generation. Like that's mind blowing.
Yeah. So I have friends who like jokingly call me a pariah. It's just like, especially in the Asian American community, you know, like what we're doing is very, very strange. But I think, you know, because we know our friends know us and they know we're not like totally bananas, you know, like they know that, I mean, we've made it through life okay. And so I think what it does is it makes people curious. Like maybe they would feel like they would never have the courage to do it, but they're like, oh, what's happening there? And I know that when we started in China, and in China, the school system is very, very authoritarian, very um, controlling, and sort of, you know, like everybody's put in a cookie cutter and stuff like that. And so I think parents who saw us do what we were doing with unschooling were like, we get why you're doing what you're doing, because we know that the system that we are in is like not great. It's not great for our kids. It's the only system that we have right now, and we don't have a choice. But if we did, we would probably choose something different. Maybe not as radical as what you guys are doing, but yeah. So I know that it was a huge privilege for us to do that as foreigners in living in China. But I think they had sort of like the extreme version of what schooling could look like as sort of a foil to this. And so they were like, okay, this makes sense. I honestly feel like if we had been living in the States this whole time, I might not have chosen unschooling because we're sort of conditioned into like this is just normal. But because we were living as foreigners in a different country in a different system, we were sort of like um, the doors were closed to us for some of the options. Like we actually couldn't enroll in the local public school because they were so overcrowded and they couldn't accommodate foreigners who
Mm,
couldn't keep up with the system anyway. Um,
mm,
so in some ways we were forced into this decision, uh,
Right.
but ultimately it did become something that I like am really passionate about and I really believe in and yeah, want to encourage more people to consider.
And you have an unschooling community at this point?
I'm very connected to the unschooling community. I don't have like I do have like a group membership that talks about all of this together. Many of them are unschoolers, but they don't have to be unschoolers to be part of my sort of like a parenting group membership. But
Wow.
I am in the middle of trying to write a book about unschooling. So we'll see.
Yay!
Wow.
Where
Yeah.
do you live?
I live in the LA area right now.
Oh, you're in the LA area. Wow. I
Yeah.
want to go back to something you said, if you all don't mind. You talked about with your son, like really allowing his developmental stage, wherever he is, of needing to really be connected to his peers and sort of be externally focused and not so much on your relationship. I think that's a really important part that Cara, you and I don't talk about that so much because I'm always talking about how close
Mm.
this so very, very focused on her friends. I mean, her friends are her life. Like she's on the phone with them like almost all day. And I do think that there's a part of this work, this mindset where you have to let go of your kid in a certain ways. You have to let go of your ideas of what you thought it was going to look like, what you thought the closeness was going to look like, what what you were told it should look like. There's so much of just having to accept what it is.
Yeah.
And that's where all the inner work happens for the parent. That you have to do the inner work of whatever your all the stories you made up, all the expectations you formed, all the ways you were going to fix what happened in your childhood with your child.
Yeah.
I'm going to make this come out different and it's going to be like this. And then you have to look at that because your kid just makes you look at all your stuff. It's like, it's like therapy on steroids times a billion. It's like your kid will just really put the mirror on you. And that's a gift. It's once you open to it, it's a gift. It's so hard though.
You know what I hear with that is like sometimes our desire for connection can still be rooted in control.
Mhm.
And I just think about when I was younger and we had like family times, but it was like enforced family times where we had to
Mhm.
get together and do something together. And I remember hating it, resenting it. It was like my parents' attempt to build connection.
Mm.
So I can see that their intentions were good, but because it was still coercive, it was still controlling, that it didn't feel good. And so, yeah, how to build connection in a way that's non-coercive, that feels good for everybody involved, and that does does often mean letting go of our expectations of what it's supposed to look like and letting it develop more organically,
Mm.
because we can't make our children love us or make them tell us everything, or we just have to be who we want to be and and give them the space to respond to that however they want to.
Yeah, it's also about trusting our children, trusting their path. They have a path that we have in a way nothing to do with. We might end up having something to do with it. But it also has its own spiritual trajectory that we don't
Mm.
really know about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think of that visualization as like our fears as parents are often the blocks to that path. They like cut off the path. They send it to a different direction. They, you know, our fears are curating a path for a child that was never meant for them to walk. And control, you know, fears and control, the two, they go together.
Yeah.
You coach parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this whole untigering process.
Yeah. So I started out just like writing a blog, processing my own journey, and it grew this community of people. And I was never really trained in any of this. Like, I'm not a therapist, I didn't go to school for any of this, but I wrote a book and I grew this community. And it wasn't until about a year ago that I actually got certified as a parent coach. But yeah, I do coach parents.
Wow. Well, I am now coaching parents. I'm a therapist for like 28 years, but this is different. Coaching parents is different. I actually do half-hour coaching sessions where they sort of get to the heart of something, and then I give them ideas, or we brainstorm together, or ask them lots of questions. I love it. I absolutely love it. It's completely different than therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't help them have deep emotional process. It's more about like validation. A lot of it is validation, and then giving them the information, and then like giving them assignments with their kid, like try this and try that, and they write it down, and sometimes they'll come back and but I thought it would be fun or interesting to talk about what happens for you or what you run into with parents in terms of their resistance.
Mm.
Because you must encounter that.
I mean, I think a lot of it goes back to that adultism and also seeing parenting as a responsibility to guarantee some sort of outcome instead of an actual relationship where so much of parenting is focused on behavior management. So a lot of like the coaching that people want is like, how can I get my child to blank,
Right.
fill in the blank? And so that is not even the question that I want to dig into. Sometimes, like, there's so many layers that we need to unpack that have nothing to do with, like, I want to get, like,
Mm-hmm.
so practical tips on how to get my child to eat the vegetables or whatever.
Brush
It's
their
like, whoa,
teeth.
okay, there's a lot to unpack and go back to. So I think yeah, I would say one thing is the behavior management piece, where that's the role that we think we play as parents, and really wanting to question that. Is that our role? Is it our right to control our children or to get them to do any particular thing? Um, what's underneath all of that, and the adultism that is so pervasive in our society that makes it okay for us to do those types of things to children.
Mm.
Those are the things that I'm generally interested in sort of helping parents to think about.
Mm-hmm.
I have a problem, which is that TikToks come up in my brain all the time, and I'm like, oh, I totally see a TikTok skit about this.
That's great.
It happens
Use
to
it
me
as inspiration.
It happens constantly, but I was just thinking about the things parents will use to erode their entire relationship with their child, like brushing teeth, or like the brushing the teeth becomes more important than the actual entire relationship.
Yeah.
It is the most intense thing.
Yeah, I always think of it like justifications, but for fears that are not valid. Like often, like underneath, you peel back all the layers, and it's like these are parts of human beings, of parents, who are just deeply, deeply concerned about something, deeply afraid, so terrified that the dentist will, have to remove 10 teeth and they don't have the money to pay the dentist and they'll have to go more. And it just becomes about this whole story, this whole narrative. And it's so interesting because it's like you're saying, like, to justify a story, to justify an idea, a value, an intention, but like where parents need to end up focusing in this work, I think that we all do, is the outcome of the intention, which is the sacrifice of the connection, typically.
Right.
So it's like we want to ask the question, like, you might want to start thinking more about the outcome and less about the intention, because the intention's not always felt by your child.
No, but they're thinking of the behavioral outcome.
Absolutely. The outcome. Oh, that's true. Yeah. So their intention in forming this behavioral outcome of compliance or whatever, but also the outcome of the eroding of the relationship, of the
Right.
closeness.
Well, that was the skit in my mind, was that the kid says, I wasn't close with my parents, but I have great teeth.
Yeah.
Think of a bunch of examples like that, like, I never curse, but I don't talk to my parents anymore, things like that. I don't know,
Yeah, I get good grades. I got great grades, but I haven't talked to my mom in 15 years.
Yeah, it's really a mind shift. It's an entire mind shift. It's like those ahas we were talking about.
But that's the thing, like, once you become open to it, open to the feedback, then you can start to learn.
Right. And once you start learning, your child will actually show you the way. That's what's so cool, is our children, they know what they need. They know what feels good. They know how to be close. Our children know how to be close. So they actually are our teachers for that. And then we're so busy, saying that's not what matters. You need to sit at the table for an hour, and that's more important.
Yeah.
I think, like, making that connection the foundation of the relationship with a child is really key, because I think parenting nowadays is so reduced to just herding cats, right? It's like how can we get them from one thing to another, get them to do the things that we want them to do so that our day runs smoothly. It's all about behavior. And if we question that narrative and allowed people to reflect more on, like, what is your relationship actually like? And what is the connection actually like? Is this building connection or breaking it down? Maybe that can just be the question that we ask, is what you're doing, building connection or tearing it down? Because I think that would clarify a lot of things and give people discernment to know, like, oh, why am I continuing to do this? It's so often still about the behavioral results. So
yeah, that's usually what they come to me with, and that's that's where it starts, and then we go from there. Yeah, it's complex. It's deeply complex, because parents feel controlled. See, that's the whole mind fuck about it, is that the child is controlled. They grow up, they have a child, and now they feel controlled by their child.
Yeah.
Because they haven't processed how controlled they were as a child. So they're reliving something with the whole child-parent relationship, and they think it's their child, which is crazy making, because the child has no power. Like, how nuts is that?
Yeah.
People feel deeply oppressed by their children.
That's interesting that you describe it that way. I've never thought of it that way. I think I assumed, like, they're oppressed by the pressures of society that expect them to control their children. But I can see what you're saying, like, that they actually feel like their child is oppressing them. I know that when I was deep in the depths of tiger parenting, I would blame my child all the time for making me so upset, or doing this to make my life so difficult. Yeah, I definitely assumed that he had that power over me. And yeah.
Right. And in that moment, you're reliving something. You're reliving being powerless. It's familiar. You're like, I don't have the power. This is so unfair. How could you do this to me? And that's not really about him. It's about your parents and society and whatever that, and it gets all funneled onto the kid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Projection. Yeah. And parents that's in the traditional like parenting paradigm. They go to coaches who are like, help me fix my kid. And that's just what behaviorist approaches do, is try to victimize the parents instead of looking at the child as the victim of this horrible, horrible system that never ends in its projection. And to actually look at it in another way and be like, oh, my kid doesn't actually have the power to pull on me in the way that I feel like they're pulling on me. Only then can you really look at like how you contribute to the dynamic. And society also impacts the disconnect in the relationship.
Yeah, another TikTok is coming to mind. This one is the parent says to the child, "How can you do this to me?" And the child's like, "I'm 2. I'm 4 years old. What are you talking about?" Yeah. That's so real. I mean, that happens to me. That's the hard part in my relationship, is when my child is triggering a feeling of powerlessness.
Yeah, and it happens to me too. And I mean, it's happened to me since my kid was born. I used to wake up in the middle of the night, to feed her or whatever. And I'd be like, why won't you sleep? Why won't you sleep? You don't sleep. I mean, she's like, I'm 1 month old. I'm like, yeah, but you need to sleep. You're supposed to be sleeping you're 1 month old now, and it never ends, it never, ever, ever ends. I have a lot of guilt about doing that, but that's just being triggered, and it's okay to be triggered. So
as long as you're in some kind of process with your trigger, it's fine to be triggered,
Yeah. Owning your part,
Yeah. Yeah, because now when I'm getting triggered, my kid goes, "Mom, are you getting triggered?" And I'll go, "Yes, I am triggered right now." So it's so relieving that she knows it's something I'm going through that has nothing to do with her, that's making me act like a not nice person. Or
do you have that with your kids too, Iris? Do your kids ever like call you out, call you in?
Yeah, I think they do. They can laugh it off. Because I am probably a highly sensitive person too, so I get like sensory overload easily. I can get overwhelmed, and so I might like burst out or like, and I think they know that it's really not about them. I've had to go back and apologize and repair, and they're like, "It's fine, we know." So, but I think it is great when they can say, like, push back and, even if it's not as gentle as like, "Mom, what's going on?" Where they're like, "Don't treat me like that," where they're like,
right.
Yeah. And it's just like a check for me. It's like, oh, thank I just appreciate that feedback, because I know it's more work that I have to do on myself and to take responsibility for that.
I love that so much.
Iris, it is so hard for Cara and I to find people who are on this wavelength. It is such a gift. Your use of language is so beautiful. I feel like you're so deeply in your heart and so connected. Like you're not in your head when you're talking about it. It feels really embodied. And it's so rare. It's so rare. You have so much to offer people.
Oh, yeah. And I'm so grateful for Vivek, who I also met and is a good friend of mine. And I'm so challenged by, like, sometimes I think he's a little extreme. So I'm like needing to, continue to grow. And yeah, it's just so grateful for a community to connect with other people who are on the same journey. And again, continuing to push the envelope, because there's still a lot of, sort of like centrist parenting content out there where sort of like what you said, Cara, where it's like, yeah, you can empathize, but you still set the boundary or set the limit. And And to me, I guess again, that doesn't address that core belief that children are humans,
Yeah. Yeah.
that children are humans who are worthy of dignity, and they're their own people.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm very grateful that you're both here talking about it and sharing the message.
Iris, do you want to tell people how to find you? I mean, we're going to put it in the show notes. We're going to put your links and everything, but do you want to say anything out loud about how people can find their way to you?
Yeah, sure. So on social media, I'm mostly on Instagram and Facebook at Untigering. And you can also go to my website, untigering.com, to find different resources. If you want to reach out to me for parent coaching or for my membership program, it's all on that page. Or you can email me at untigering@gmail.com if you have any direct questions for me.
Yay. Thank
Yay.
you.
Thank you so much, Iris.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
This has been Your Kids Don't Suck. You can find me, Cara Tedstone, at www.caratedstonetherapy.com and on Instagram at Cara Tedstone Therapy. On my website, you'll find links to recommended readings and a link to my Reparenting with Mindfulness workbook, available now on Amazon.
You can find me, Rythea Lee, at www.rythea.com. That's RYTHEA.com. There you'll find published books, articles, and music, and parenting videos. Also, I'm on TikTok at Rythea Lee, on Instagram at Rythea Lee. You can book parent mentoring sessions with me through my website. And also I have an Advice from a Loving Bitch YouTube show that helps people heal self-hatred, and that's rythea.com/advice. It is important and essential to put our voices, Rythea and Cara, in a context. We are two white, cisgendered, straight, middle-class women living with financial and societal privilege. Because of this, our perspectives are limited and do not reflect the realities of all of our listeners. This podcast will feature guests with expertise around conscious parenting who differ in race, class, abilities, sexual orientation, and histories from us, to broaden the conversation and reflect the lives of as many people as possible. 25% of the proceeds of this podcast will go to creators of color who have been mentors and influences on our work and in our growth as parents.
If you like our show, please subscribe and stay tuned for more conscious parenting advice and insights. And check out our link tree at linktr.ee/yourkidsdon'tsuck to donate and connect with us.